Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Very Cold Lasagna podcast, your place for all those filthy casual takes on the world of sports. I'm your host, DylanLasagna. Welcome to episode number 172 of this icy yet spicy sports podcast. And in this episode, we have our annual tradition. What exactly is that annual tradition in January? Well, it's the annual tradition that started it all here for Very Cold Lasagna, and that is the Filthy Casuals Guide to the NFL Playoffs. That is right, ladies and gentlemen. The Filthy Casuals Guide to NFL Wild Card Weekend is the episode that began it all. Episode number 1 back in 2021. And here we are 3 years later to do another one of these, the fourth one. So here we are in episode 172, 171 episodes later. At that correct? But yeah, 171 episodes later, here we are with the 4th edition of the Filthy Casuals Guide to what is now the 2023 NFL Super Wildcard Weekend. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about the playoffs once again. It's the most wonderful time of the year for all the NFL fans out there, whether you're a hardcore, a casual, middle of the road, or even non-NFL sports fans out there. This is a great time of the year to watch some playoff football. The best time where it's one or done action in the month of January and going into February. So it's going to be intense. It's going to be an intense month of football, intense month of action, and it all begins with Super Wildcard Weekend. Super Wildcard, Ultra Wildcard. Look at this fucking wildcard here, pal. So yeah, we're here to talk about all the games that are happening this coming weekend. We got about 6 games, I believe, from Saturday to Monday night. And it's going to be a good slate of games on hand. So we're going to give you my filthy casual preview to it all here in this episode. So before we get into the swing of things, a little bit of housekeeping before we get started with episode 172. First, with my social media, follow me on Twitter. X. At Very Cold Lasagna, as well as Instagram, also at Very Cold Lasagna. If you're listening to this on audio, make sure you rate and review the show. I'm on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Rate the show 1 to 5 stars, however you want to rate it, and leave a nice little review. Leave some feedback. It really means the world to me. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you leave a like, smash the subscribe button, leave a comment with your own takes on each and every topic that I talk about, and share this with your friends. Share this with a stranger. Share this with your neighbor. Share this with whoever. Spread the word about this podcast entitled Very Cold Lasagna. And give me your own takes, your own filthy casual fan takes on all the topics that I talk about here on this icy yet spicy podcast. So that being said, let's get into the 4th annual tradition that is called NFL Super Wildcard Weekend, the 2023 edition of the Filthy Casual Fans Preview, the official Filthy Casuals Guide to 2023 NFL Super Wildcard Weekend. So I always like to do this for not everyone that's familiar with the NFL or anyone that's familiar with the NFL playoffs. So you may have come across this podcast. You may have come across your very first episode of Very Cold Lasagna, and you're probably asking yourself, hey, you, the host, what is a Super Wildcard Weekend? Well, for how I like to explain it, what is a Super Wildcard Weekend, we have to break it down is what is a wildcard round? What is the first round of the NFL playoffs? Well, to explain it in the sense of the filthy casual fan, the NFL wildcard round is the first round of the NFL playoffs. So the NFL playoffs is 4 rounds. The wildcard, the divisional, or the semifinals, the conference championships, which is actually the semifinal, the conference finals, I say it per se, and then you have the Super Bowl, which is the championship round. So you have your quarterfinal, your semifinal, your conference championships, and then the Super Bowl, which is your championships. So this is for the teams that failed to grab the number 1 seed, the top seed in the conference, that first round bye. So seeds that are 2 to number 7 in each conference, the AFC, and the NFC, the American and National Football Conferences, they're going to be playing each other in different matchups throughout the weekend. So you have number 2 versus number 7, 3 versus number 6, 4 versus number 5. And that brings us Super Wild Card Weekend. Super Wild Card. Ultra Wild Card. Look at this fucking wild card, pal. So anyway, you get those matchups, and the winners of those matchups go on to the next matchup, which is the divisional round. And they will decide, depending on how things go, depending on the seeding. So let's say, for example, the 7th seed beats the 2 seed, they'll go on to face the number 1 seed in the divisional playoffs. If the 6th seed beats the 3 seed and the 2 seed beats the 7th seed, and I guess they say the 5 seed beats the 4 seed, the 6th seed will go to the 1 seed, and the 2 seed will face the 5 seed. It gets a little dicey if things don't play out as expected, but hey, that's what the playoffs are all about. That's why it's the best time to be a NFL fan, a non-sports fan, whatnot. So an interesting note about these NFL playoffs this year, almost half of the playoff field in this year consists of teams, almost half of them didn't even qualify for the postseason last year or even the last 2 years. So 2 of them are actually making their returns for the first time in quite some time. And we'll get to those teams in just a bit. But for those of you unaware of the NFL playoffs and the structure of it, especially in the first round, when we're talking about Super Wildcard Weekend, now you know. So I'll give you a little bit. See if you're kind of in the gist of it. If you're not, that's okay. But now that you've had a little bit of a feel of it, now you've kind of had an understanding of it, let's get into our real filthy casual preview to all the games going on in this 2023 NFL Super Wildcard Weekend. And it all begins on Saturday afternoon in the AFC side of things as the number 5 Cleveland Browns take on the number 4 AFC South champions Houston Texans. So that game's going on NBC, and it's a rematch of their Week 16 meeting back in December on Christmas Eve, where the Browns beat the Texans in Houston. But here's the catcher from that game. The Texans quarterback, C.J. Stroud, their starting quarterback, was not in that game. He was out with the concussion, so you had their backup quarterback, Case Keenum, playing that game, hence why the Browns handedly won that game against Houston. So, much different scenario this time around. Going to be a much more competitive matchup with C.J. Stroud back in the lineup and clearly hosting this game again. So, going to be a fun one to kick things off. And some of them will be saying, the NFL put the Houston Texans once again in their Saturday traditional spot for the playoffs, their Saturday afternoon spot, which in fairness is true because every time the Houston Texans have been on in the playoffs, they've always had the opening slot. Saturday, 1 o'clock Pacific time, 4:30 Eastern. Whether it's on ESPN or NBC, it always kicks off the playoffs. But anyway, enough a little bit of the factoids. Before we get into our picks, our keys to victory, some little side notes heading into this game. We have to talk about the teams, their journey going into this game, going into the playoffs. And let's start off with the Cleveland Browns, because for the Cleveland Browns, they became the number 5 seed, but how did they even get to this point? So for the Cleveland Browns, they were heading into 2023 after last year, prior to that in 2022, they traded a big haul for former Houston Texans quarterback, ironically, Deshaun Watson. But the problem was with this huge scandal, this huge sexual allegation scandal from Deshaun Watson, he got suspended for much of 2022. And when he came back, having not played for almost 2 years, he came back very rusty towards the end of that 2022 campaign. And there wasn't really much that the Browns could do. So Watson had a full offseason to work with. And even then, even with all the preparation the Browns had, and despite being led by a very strong defense, with defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz making the calls, edge rushers Myles Garrett and new additions of Darius Smith. And then you had a secondary that was making play after play with a lot of key contributors in that backfield. The Browns were off to a 50-50 start because Watson still was very inconsistent, making a lot of bad decisions with the football, and he was just very off key. Still, I'm not sure if he was still rusty, but either way, not a good sign, especially considering they traded a big fat haul to go and get him and gave him a big fat new contract to go along with it. And not only that, a shoulder injury that he occurred early in the season, it knocked him out for a couple of games. And as soon as week 10, even though they beat the Baltimore Ravens, it eventually knocked him out of the season. So all season long, it became a quarterback carousel for the Browns. Sure, they were winning games, but they were still having issues at the quarterback position, which has become a running gag for the Cleveland Browns. You had fill-in options like Dorian Thompson-Robinson, the rookie or second-year option, if I remember correctly. And then you had journeyman P.J. Walker. They filled in decently. They were kind of either better off or worse than Deshaun Watson. But then after week 12 came around, when both of them actually ended up injured, they decided to go and get veteran Joe Flacco, who was a former rival of them when he was on the Baltimore Ravens. So when they when they went and got Joe Flacco, it took a little bit of time for him to get acclimated to the team, acclimated to the offense. But once he did, the performance of them suddenly changed. We saw Flacco make the offense a little bit more dynamic, get more aggressive, go downfield more, with tight end David Njoku and receiver Amari Cooper having some of their best outings for the rest of the season. So they became a very downfield heavy team. So the Browns managed to secure their first 10-win season since 2020 and secured their second playoff berth in just 21 years in Week 17 in that win over the New York Jets. So the Browns, they've endured a crap ton of quarterbacks, but their defense is still riding high. They're getting a few key players back on that end. I'm not sure about the offense, but the Browns, they've been through hell and high water, and here they are in the playoffs with a chance to make a little bit of a run. Meanwhile, for the number 4 Houston Texans, they entered this season with not many expectations. After blowing a tank job in 2022 on the last game of the season, they won that game when they were that close to the number 1 overall pick. And then Lovie Smith, knowing that he was going to get fired, he decided to, he's going to give you the big fuck you to the organization and decided to win that game. It cost them the number 1 overall pick, and they went from 1 to 2, but it actually ended up not mattering to them. So they still managed to have a successful offseason. They hired former 49ers defensive coordinator DeMeco Ryans, and they drafted Ohio State quarterback C.J. Stroud, which ended up being the quarterback that they wanted anyway. And they made this aggressive trade right after to go and get Alabama linebacker Will Anderson Jr., who was one of the best linebackers in college. So they managed to go and make 3 big moves with the head coach, and then 2 big draft moves back to back. So still, there were not many expectations with this team, and the question became how all 3 of them would execute, especially CJ Stroud, in a season many thought would be one of rebuilding. So in actuality, sure, CJ Stroud had his rookie struggles, but even in the midst of all that, you would still notice that something was about to brew with these Houston Texans starting in week 3. And that all began in Jacksonville when they actually managed to upset the Jaguars. Not just upset them, but upset them big. They blew them out of the land of all elite. So Stroud started developing this connection with the soon-to-be emerging rookie talent in Tank Dell, their soon-to-be top receiver at the time. and their second option, Nico Collins. So they were suddenly starting to form a receiving connection over there in Houston. Meanwhile, on the defensive end, D'Amico Ryan's defensive front of Will Anderson Jr., Malik Collins, Jonathan Greenard, that defensive front, slowly but surely coming together to find ways to get to their quarterback. So there were still clearly holes in this Texans team, no doubt. But I mean, as the season wore on, sure, they're still flaws, but they're surprisingly stringing together wins. They're finding ways to win and becoming an X Factor playoff contender. And by the end of the season, they ultimately accomplished that goal. The surprise goal that many didn't expect. I personally didn't expect before the season started. They won 10 games, a mark that nobody expected, and they managed to clinch a playoff berth. Ironically, a year after they blew the tank. They blew the tank in Indianapolis. And a year later, they clinched a playoff spot in Indianapolis. And not only that, they got themselves one better because thanks to the Titans, they clinched the AFC South by virtue of the Titans getting their own payback against the Jaguars from a year earlier. So the Texans, they had themselves one heck of a season, one heck of a surprise season, thanks to the surprise developments of C.J. Stroud, Will Anderson Jr., and the culture that D'Amico Ryans is really building over there down south. So real credit to them. So now both of these teams are set to collide again. Much different game to be expected. As you know, now with the Texans, you have C.J. Stroud and this young Texans team making their first playoff appearance. The first rookie QB and head coaching duo to do so in NFL history, might I add. But now you also have Joe Flacco, who's making his return to the playoffs in, I think it's nearly 10 years since he's last been there. I mean, not counting the one that the Ravens had 5 years ago when Lamar Jackson was the starter. So this is his first real playoff start since the 2014-15 playoffs. So been a long time for Mr. Joe Flacco. So gonna be an interesting game. A lot of narratives to be written up. But in terms of like the keys to victory for both of these teams, I think for the Browns, you got to find a way to take pressure off of Joe Flacco, because for Joe Flacco, sure, they love airing it out with him, but I think the problem is he's been turning the ball over a little too much each and every game. There's at least one game per average that he turns the ball over at least once, if not twice, and that's very concerning, especially when you're in a playoff situation now. You cannot be turning the ball over more than once, and if you do, it's gonna really cost you. It really is gonna cost you against much better teams if you get past the Houston Texans. And then for the Texans, you gotta avoid any self-inflicted mistakes of your own, and you also cannot stall out on any drives, any potential drives that can help you advance downfield. So the Texans, they've had some of those issues in that Week 18 game against the Colts in that playoff feel. So maybe they can learn something from that game and help them prepare for this game against the Browns. So, C.J. Stroud and the Texans, they had a very surprising season. I mean, I will give my flowers to that. But I think in terms of this game, I think the defense of the Cleveland Browns is better than the Texans. Than the Texans. I think they'll find a way to limit, per se, C.J. Stroud. And I think the experience of Joe Flacco, yes, the turnovers aside, the playoff experience of Joe Flacco, he's been to a Super Bowl before. He's been in these situations before. He'll rally Cleveland together with this experience, and he'll get Cleveland just past Houston in what could be a close game. So I'm going to go with the Browns in this game, but it should be a good way to kick off Wild Card Weekend. So then we have the nightcap of Saturday in what's going to be a very cold game in a little freezer. Sadly, no very cold lasagna there, But nonetheless, we have the number 6 Miami Dolphins taking on the number 3 Kansas City Chiefs. But unfortunately for America, maybe for the rest of the world too, you have to watch this. You have to pay up the $5 a month, pal. And you got to pay up the dough because you got to watch this on the P on cock. So, unfortunately, yes, this wildcard game is locked behind a streaming service. I don't know why, but the times have changed, pal. But just because the times have changed doesn't mean we have to eat shit. But nonetheless, this is what the NFL wants. They got to make that dough. It's just I'm not gonna take that shit, man. I'm really not gonna take that shit. So anyway, all that aside, all the stupid peacock shit aside, this is a rematch from their Week 10 meeting in Frankfurt, Germany. The Chiefs beat the Dolphins in a game full of mistakes for Miami. But nonetheless, let's get into this game. Let's get into talking about this game in a little bit. Because for the Miami Dolphins going into this season as the number 6 seed, it was a season full of disappointment the year prior in 2022. It was initially a season full of promise when they started out 3-0, but they fell apart. They fell apart all because of Tua Tagovailoa suffering multiple concussions, and they all once he came back into the lineup each and every time, they fell apart. They fell apart, especially late in December, and after that season of disappointment, they were hoping to rebound this year and surpass the Buffalo Bills in the AFC East. And they looked well on their way to doing such for much of the year, thanks to that explosive offense of Tua and receivers Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and running back Raheem Mostert. And then once on the defensive end, you had Jalen Ramsey come back in to go alongside Xavier Howard. Then that defense, it's hard to pick up as well. And you had key defensive contributors in the defensive front. But then there was a major problem that arose despite the success of their season. All but one of their losses came against legitimate playoff contenders. And in those losses, no one on Miami looked as effective when they were playing against everyone, their wins. Notice a trend in their wins. They played against, other than the Dallas Cowboys, they played against scrubs. They played literal scrubs, like the Carolina Panthers. They played against the Las Vegas Raiders. Many other teams that I can list, the Dolphins played scrubs. Man, I get it. You play who you play. That's on your schedule. But still, when you go and face teams like the Chiefs, when you go and face teams like the Bills, when you go and face teams like, who else we got? I mean, the Ravens? Yeah. You have to look the part in the same way that you do against the scrubs. But for the Dolphins, they did not. And keep in mind, they against another scrub in the Tennessee Titans, they also failed. They also failed, and the Brights shined most. So turnovers were made. The defense had trouble limiting the likes of Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and even Jalen Hurts. And also odd play calling from Mike McDaniel killed them in certain situations in those losses. So late season losses to the Titans and the Ravens would eventually come back to bite the Dolphins in the butt, as in that winner-take-all game against the Buffalo Bills, in a situation where Miami really put themselves in that regular season finale, they lost. They lost once again in a high-profile matchup. They disappeared, and it was very consequential. Not only did they lose the AFC East that they had a grip on for most of the season, but they dropped all the way down from the 2nd seed to the 6th seed. Talk about ouch. From going to playing in the comforts of your own warm, cozy home of Hard Rock Stadium, and now you got to go on the road in the cold-ass weather to play the potential yet struggling buzzsaw that is the Kansas City Chiefs. So making matters worse for the Miami Dolphins going into this game, as they get ready to play in the very cold fridge with no very cold lasagna, are the piling injuries on both sides of the ball. I mean, there was no Raheem Mostert in the last game. Not sure if he's going to play here. But now you're also missing a lot of key defensive contributors like Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips, Andrew Van Ginkel, Jerome Baker. All of them gone with season-ending injuries. And then you're missing a quarter of your offensive line. Isaiah Wynn, Connor Williams. Ouch. For a Dolphins team that started off red hot and then faltered yet again late. Meanwhile, for the Kansas City Chiefs, the reigning, defending, undisputed Super Bowl champions, they're looking to get back to the Super Bowl and become the first repeat champion since the 2004 Patriots. But, even though they still have Patrick Mahomes, their franchise quarterback, and they still have their top tight end, Travis Kelce, there were still troubling signs early for the champions. And as the season progressed, it eventually became a lot more glaring. And one of the biggest problems, if not the biggest problem, that was apparent for the Chiefs is the receiving core. The receiving core was missing routes. The receiving core was especially dropping balls. In that first game against the Detroit Lions, that costed them a game. And it would go on to become an alarming theme of the season. Kadarius Toney dropping the ball in certain situations, and Toney lining up offsides, very notably against the Bills in Week 13. The passing defense kind of regressing back to giving up chunk plays that turned into big ones. The slightly revamped offensive line with their 2 signings, giving Patrick Mahomes less time to throw, putting him more under pressure than the year prior. And it left him more prone to turnovers. So, these issues wouldn't be as prevalent in the first half, but the second half of the season was a much different story. Those issues cost the Chiefs games against the Eagles, the Packers, the Bills, and heck, even the Raiders managed to beat them. And that was a Raiders team that, didn't have a lot to play for, but they managed to go into Arrowhead and pound the pudding out of the Chiefs. But, for the Chiefs, they still managed to win the AFC West, but they struggled in the second half. And there is no apparent fix, at least for right now, for the defending Super Bowl champions as they get ready to go on a title defense in the playoffs. And that starts in the freezing cold comforts of their home. So going into this game, Tyreek Hill is going to make his first trip back to Kansas City for the first time since they traded him last year. And this game is going to be very cold, like just 5 degrees Fahrenheit with a very windy weather and minus 10 degrees wind chill. Yeah, I hope the Dolphins are going to bundle their butts up. I'm not sure there's going to be any snow, but if it is, then the Dolphins are kind of screwed. So the keys to victory for both of these teams, for the Dolphins, you got to find ways to be aggressive. You got to attack the air. The Chiefs are still weak in the secondary. They give up a good amount of chunk plays. So for the Dolphins, give Tua some time to throw and then air it out to Tyreek and find a way to get Jalen Waddle involved too, because it can't always be centered around Tyreek. And then for the Chiefs, it's simple. Catch the damn ball. Just catch the damn ball. Stop dropping it if you want to have a chance against this Dolphins second-rate defense now. So the Chiefs, yes, they have a litany of issues at hand, but they don't outweigh the ones that are present with the Dolphins currently, who are so beat up at the defensive side of the ball. They had to go and sign a number of veterans to fill those spots this week. So it's going to be a very cold game to cap off the night 1 of wildcard weekend, but expect Mahomes and company to come out on top and advance to the divisional. So I'm going with the Chiefs. So now we get to the Sunday slate. So day 2 of wildcard weekend. So there are 3 days here, pal. Sunday, Saturday, and Monday. Sunday and Saturday should be flipped, but you get my point. Now we start with the early morning game in the AFC side, which wraps up the AFC slate of wildcard weekend. On CBS, we have the 7th-seeded Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the 2-seeded Buffalo Bills. Both of these teams were looking at a point where they weren't going to make the playoff picture, like right before the season ended. But let's talk about how they even ended up here in the first place. So with the Pittsburgh Steelers starting off, they just missed out on the playoffs this point last year. They could have made it at 9-8, but tiebreakers to, I believe the last team was Who was I don't remember. I think the last team. Oh, it was the Miami Dolphins. They lost the tiebreaker to the Miami Dolphins. Good thing I checked that. But anyway, they hope to get back into the playoff picture. But at the same time, they're also facing this sort of like kind of like midlife crisis kind of situation. You know, they're kind of good enough to be in the mix, but at the same time, they're not good enough to make a deep run. Sure, they've never had a losing season under Mike Tomlin. They never had a losing season for 20 years. But since they won the Super Bowl in 2009, since they won this, they made it to a Super Bowl in 2011 where they lost to the Packers. It's just like there really hasn't been much going on with the Steelers. Sure, they've done a lot of winning, but it's just like not much else. Not really a lot else. I mean, at some point, you gotta ask yourself, is there gonna be any change coming? So for this season now, they're still bringing in. They still had Mike Tomlin. They still had a good amount of high end talent, as some people would like to say. So the Steelers would shake off a very bad opening day loss to the 49ers by going 5-2 up to the midway point. The TJ Watt led defense, is keeping the team very competitive. The problem was the offense was very rapidly, wildly inconsistent. Kenny Pickett in his second year, something was very off. Like for one week, he would do very well. He would find like open receivers like Pickett, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, and then another week he was just wildly overthrowing them, or he was just like ditching the play. So that offense with Matt Canada at the helm, an offensive coordinator, it was just bad. It was just badly inconsistent. And so they ended up firing Matt Canada midway through the season. So I forgot who his replacement was, but either way, their fortunes turned for the worst after Kenny Pickett went down with a hand injury in week 13. Midway through that Arizona game, he was replaced by Mitch Trubisky for the next 2.5 games while Pickett was recovering. And no surprise, Trubisky lost them all. So included a key game against the Indianapolis Colts that the Steelers got blown out in. Now they were sitting at 7-7, and they got knocked out of the playoff picture entirely. They weren't eliminated yet, but they were getting close to that point. So Mike Tomlin started kind of long time quarterback, but he's been there for like a little while now, and that was Mason Rudolph. So Mason Rudolph previously started games in 2019 when Ben Roethlisberger was out for a lot of that season. So Rudolph would end up being a much more efficient spark for the offense. I mean, it's not saying much, but hey, I mean, you got to get something going. So it rediscovered its identity around their receiver, George Pickens, Najee Harris, and Jalen Warren, their running backs, that 1-2 punch. Pittsburgh won its final 3 games. But, even with that win in the season finale against the Baltimore Ravens, you had to wait. You had to wait for the next day because the one holding the cards was the Jacksonville Jaguars. But, fortunately for the Jaguars, they self-destructed. They self-destructed against the Tennessee Titans, and the Steelers were in the playoffs for the second time in 3 years. So they got the one in the last playoff spots. Who got the other? Well, that's the next team I'm going to talk about, and that is the number 2 seeded Buffalo Bills. So the Bills, in spite of 2 straight divisional playoff collapses in the last 2 years, they were still marked as one of the top favorites to reach the Super Bowl on the AFC side of things. But after starting out 3-1 in this 2023 campaign, things started to trend down for Josh Allen and the Bills. And that was mainly due to their inability to close out games. Josh Allen's high turnover frequency costing them games. They were also losing a couple of key players on defense. They also had some questionable play calling from offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey, who played a role into their slump. That eventually led to his firing after the team lost to the Broncos in a winnable game, mind you, in Week 10. So that was, a very down time for the Bills. So after they lost to the Eagles, they used the bye week to strategize, recover. And after that week 13 bye, they sat at 6-6. Their playoff hopes on life support. The Bills managed to win their final 5 games, including against the Chiefs, the Cowboys, and the Dolphins. They also got some self-destructing help from the Bengals, the Jags, and the Dolphins, who they beat, to net a playoff berth. And by beating the Dolphins in Miami in that season finale, they snatched away the AFC East. Winning all those games really benefited them, and the Dolphins losing it benefited them as well. So rather than being out of the playoff picture entirely, they saved their season, and they get to host at least one playoff game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So going into this game for both of these teams, for the Steelers, one key piece that they're going to be sorely missing in this one is TJ Watt. TJ Watt injured his MCL, so he has a leg injury that's going to keep him out for this game. If the Steelers somehow manage to upset the Bills in this one, then they could possibly get him back. But for this one, it's going to be a big blow to their defense. They got to find different ways to pressure up Josh Allen. Speaking of Allen, a big reason, a big concern for the Bills is his ability to protect the football. Sure, they're getting all these wins, but that's, despite Josh Allen failing to protect the football. So that's going into a key to victory for the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen, they got to talk some sense into him. They really got to talk some sense into Josh Allen to find a way to eliminate the turnovers altogether. They gotta ask him. They gotta really talk into him to make smarter decisions with the football, because in the playoffs, if you make really dumb dick decisions, it's gonna cost you the team. It's really gonna cost you the team. So I feel like they have to alleviate the pressure off of him by running the ball a little bit more on rushing downs, like let's say first or second down, and then have him throw on second and third down. I don't know. Either way, they got to take some pressure off of him, because he really going back to that wave of really trying to do too much all by himself. And then for the Steelers, continue to go by the formula that has helped you not all season, but these last couple of games. Center the offense around Najee Harris and receiver George Pickens. I mean, Mason Rudolph certainly is being helped by that. So continue to go by that formula. So the Steelers offense, it has struggled all season. But even with Mason Rudolph giving them a spark, I mean, they could fight. They can definitely show some fight in this one. But don't expect the Steelers struggles to change at all in this game. So as long as Josh Allen doesn't make any backbreaking mistakes, doesn't have a really bad game in terms of the turnovers, I think the Bills should win this one. I'm not saying easily, not comfortably, but I mean, I'll go with the Bills. It's quite simple. So then in the afternoon game, the first game of the NFC side, the 7th-seeded Green Bay Packers take on the number 2-seeded Dallas Cowboys, the NFC East champions of 2023. This game is going to be on Fox. This is a rematch. This is a rematch of the 2016 NFC divisional playoffs. Remember that game? Rookie Dak Prescott, and then the veteran Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers breaking the hearts and the souls of Dallas with that long drive to Devontae Adams that throw. Was it Devontae Adams or no? It was some other receiver, but either way, he led a big drive at the end, and then Mason Crosby broke the hearts of Dallas with that game-winning field goal to send them to the NFC title game in Atlanta. So, yeah, and Dallas had the number 1 seed too, and they just proceeded to blow it. So anyway, in terms of the 2023 season for the Green Bay Packers, last year, it saw the end of an era for them as Aaron Rodgers was traded from the Packers to the New York Jets, and it fully ushered in a brand new era that was Jordan Love's. However, that era would begin with the rocky start. Jordan Love struggled with turnovers, play execution, reading the field, kind of experiencing, those rookie struggles. Because remember, Jordan Love, yes, he's technically not a rookie. He's in his fourth or fifth year, but not a lot of playing time for Mr. Love because, well, he's been sitting for he was drafted 2020, 4 seasons behind Aaron Rodgers. So kind of a similar situation with both Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. Love is now just getting playing time. So not also helping Jordan Love early on was a receiving core not being on the same page with them, as well as a also bad running game with Aaron Jones in and out with injuries. So the Packers by week 10, they were sitting at week 3-6, and the season looked doomed to fail amidst those same struggles. But that all changed starting on Thanksgiving. They had a 3-game winning streak that saw them beat the Lions in an upset win. And then right after that, he had a career-defining performance against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, with all the stars out on Sunday night. So, yeah, it seemed like the Packers were finally getting back on track. They seemed like they were going to go on a late December run. So, they ran, however, into a 2-game slip-up against the New York Giants. They inexplicably had that game slip away from them, a very bad performance. And then the next game against the Bucs, you saw Jordan Love regress back to his early season form, and a good defense that was really starting to regress from that point onwards. That once again put the Packers on the brink of elimination. But with the Seahawks and the Vikings also faltering, the Packers took the opportunity to rediscover its footing and do just enough to win the final 3 games of the season and claim the last spot in Week 18. So for the Packers, yeah, it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of trial and tribulations during the first season of Jordan Love. But I mean, hey, you got a playoff spot out of it. So meanwhile, for the Dallas Cowboys, they were going into 2023 looking to finally get to the place they haven't seen in almost 30 years. And that was the NFC Championship game. They've almost gotten to that point in the last 2 opportunities they had, but they've had 2 straight early playoff exits with the first round game and the divisional game 2 years straight. All early exits. So they retained most of their roster from the last 2 years. They also made 2 key trades in receiver Brandon Cooks from the Texans and corner Stephon Gilmore from the Colts to assist in those areas respectively. So the Dallas Cowboys would start off hot with blowout wins over the Giants, the Jets, the Patriots. But then that's where you see something a little bit interesting about these Dallas Cowboys. They were like Thanos at home, but on the road, they really struggled. They suffered road losses to the Arizona Cardinals. That was like one of the early surprise upset losses that they had. And then to the 49ers, they got their butts whooped. But the Niners lost, it became a little bit of a trigger for Dallas in their season. It would take a little while, but their offense led by Dak Prescott and receiver CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks, they would run roughshod over the next month. Now, keep in mind, in fairness, these were against bottom-feeding teams, but nonetheless, these are still who you play on the schedule. They justified their claim near the top of the NFC with statement wins over the Seahawks and the Eagles to start December. But once again, in December, you still have that problem on the road against the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins. Still having that trouble of, you're like Thanos at home, but then you're like, I don't know, what's a good polar opposite? I don't know. You're kind of like, I don't know, Aquaman on the road, where you don't really show up, where you really no show on the road. So they all really struggled on the road, regardless. But despite the road woes, the Cowboys won their final 2 games against Detroit and in Washington. And thanks to some big help from the Arizona Cardinals and the Giants, they swiped the division away from the collapsing Eagles in Week 18. And now they get at least one home playoff game against the Green Bay Packers. So, speaking of this game, Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy gets to face his old team. Yeah, he's already faced them once, but that was in the regular season. Now he gets to face them in a game where it really matters the most. Win or go home situation. One or done in the NFC wild card. So should be a story full of narratives here and there, but should be an interesting matchup. Jordan Love's first playoff game against the beast that is within AT&T Stadium. So should be an interesting one, but at the same time, I can also see people writing this off pretty early. So keys to victory for both of these teams. For the Packers, I think it's pretty simple for them. Jordan Love, it's his first playoff game, but he's got to find a way to shake off those nerves. Yes, it's a pretty young Packers team, but if they want to find a way to slay the giant that is the Cowboys, you got to find a way to shake off the nerves, shake off the crowd, and find a way to connect with your young receiving core and Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and other key contributors that have helped you so far. So if you can shake off the nerves and find a way to figure out this Cowboys defense that, it still kind of struggles in the passing defense, then you might find something. And for the Cowboys, you can certainly attack this Green Bay vulnerable secondary pretty often. If Prescott can unleash CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, and Brandon Cooks, then they should have no problem winning this game. But for the Cowboys, barring some no-show collapse, if they literally don't show up in a game that they are heavily favored to win, then they should be able to pierce through the Packers' deteriorating defense. I mean, I get it. Jordan Love has had his moments in the clutch late in the season, but I don't think he and his offense are not yet at the point of challenging a team like the Cowboys. They could be on their way, but they're not just quite there yet. It's going to be a little bit of trouble for them to keep up, especially with the defense on their side that has really fallen off. So I'm going to go the Cowboys with done on this one, barring some epic collapse. So then in the nightcap, this should be the wild card game of the weekend. A really, really fun one. And that is on the NFC side of things. The 6th-seeded LA Rams taking on the 3rd-seeded Detroit Lions on NBC. Who could have asked for a big primetime game like this one? And that is because, well, Matthew Stafford, formerly of the Detroit Lions, coming back home, this time as a member of the LA Rams, taking on Jared Goff, once a member of the LA Rams, now facing his old team as a Detroit Lion. Yes, Goff has already faced Matthew Stafford's Rams in the regular season 2 years ago, but now it's on his turf. It's in Ford Field. The first playoff game on Ford Field ever. The first home playoff game for Detroit in almost 30 years, in over 30 years actually. So this is going to be a real barn burner on Sunday night. So for the Rams, how did they even get to this point? How did the LA Rams go from playoff no shows, from one of the worst defending Super Bowl champions ever, to making it back to the playoffs in just 1 year? Well, so for the LA Rams, last year they were at home sitting on their couch, pondering what went completely wrong in their Super Bowl 56 title defense, because in 2022 it was a big disappointment for them. I mean, injuries, a couple of key players leaving. They lost their quarterback Matthew Stafford to injury, Cooper Kupp to injury. Aaron Donald also got injured. So the Rams 2022 title defense, it was just not there for them. And then you had an offseason speculation that head coach Sean McVay could leave, and then key defensive tackle Aaron Donald would also retire, but both of them would return. So the Rams were to come out with a fresh slate and then hopefully get back to the playoffs. So although they were fully healthy, they struggled out of the gates to a 3-3 mark, and then they lost 3 straight going to the bye week. So reason for this being is that, their defense is not really not really that impressive, especially in the passing defense department. They give up a lot of big plays. And then you had Matthew Stafford turning the ball over quite frequently. And the offense, when it's getting close to scoring position, they stall out. Or they get pushed out of field goal range. So for that offense, it was, So after the bye week, they went 7-1. So for the Rams, it was because of a continuing emergence of Stafford's second option behind Cooper Kupp. And that was the rookie receiver, the rookie sensation, Puka Nacua. He went on to break records for a rookie and make it to a Pro Bowl. So Nacua is actually pretty impressive, pretty speedy, pretty elusive. So it looks like they found another option to take some pressure off of Cooper Kupp. So also leading the late were contributing factors like linebacker Ernest Jones, rookie Byron Young to help out Aaron Donald. So this stretch would reward them with a playoff berth after last year's disappointing Super Bowl title defense. So there's still some key concerns for the LA Rams, like stalled out drives, letting teams hang around a little too long. But hey, after last year's disappointment, you gotta at least give the Rams some credit with making it back to the postseason and having this successful of a season for them at 10-7. Meanwhile, for the Detroit Lions, these have been a crazy 2 years for them. You come in with a brand new head coach in 2021 with Dan Campbell. Yeah, the season went as expected, but each of the last two seasons has finished with some promise for the Lions. Sure, didn't exactly end the way that you wanted in 2021, but you see that some potential is coming. And then 2022, it finishes with a resounding statement win in Green Bay that eliminates the Packers from playoff contention on the last game of the season. So the Lions built off of that to invest in help on their weak areas, especially on defense, for maybe something bigger in 2023. And man, did they start off this season with a bang. They started off with a big opening night upset win in Kansas City, knocking off the defending Super Bowl champions. And they had a little bit of a setback on their home opener against the Seahawks. But nonetheless, they managed to open the season at 6-2. And, you had an offense led by quarterback Jared Goff, who was more aggressive and feisty than his days in LA. And especially with the newest additions in the rookie tight end Sam Laporta, veteran David Montgomery contributing early and often. And then later on, they started to implement more of their rookie running back who they drafted in the first round, Jahmyr Gibbs. Defensively, you still had a suspect secondary despite the additions that they made there. But the defense, led by its edge rushers, Aiden Hutchinson and linebacker Alex Anzalone, it kept opposing offenses off the field, and it really threw off opposing quarterbacks. Late in the season, though, concerns started to amount for the Lions because you had suspect play from Jared Goff, over-aggressive play calling from head coach Dan Campbell, the secondary play starting to worsen, and there were people out there, including myself, doubting the Lions because they lost to the Packers, they lost to the Bears in games they really should have won, because now we were questioning them about whether they can truly compete in this NFC where it was really weak. And now they were losing these games. They were having all these concerns. And you had suddenly the Packers and a beat-up Vikings team that lost Kirk Cousins midway through the season back in the mix to steal the NFC North from you. But the Lions riding the course with wins over the Broncos and the Vikings back-to-back weeks. They wrapped up their first ever NFC North title and their first division title in over 30 years when it was last the NFC Central in 1993. But nonetheless, this is a big accomplishment from Detroit, from losing all those games in 2021. And now here you are, 2 years later, you're division champions, getting ready to host the first ever playoff game in Ford Field. That is something. That is really something for you. And yeah, there are still some flaws, especially defensively, but this is something to really build upon for the Lions to make a potentially deeper run going into the next season. So for both of these teams, I mean, obviously I mentioned all the big narratives that are going into this game. You know, Matthew Stafford returning to Detroit for the first time, I think, since he got traded back in 2021. You know, he played there from 2009 to 2020, so a large majority of his career so far, before he got traded to LA for Jared Goff, and then Jared Goff facing his old team that he traded him at home. He already lost in 2021 to the Rams during their Super Bowl year. So this is going to be a big game. Jared Goff's going to be out for revenge. Matthew Stafford maybe also out for revenge for the team that traded him, but it's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun game full of narratives and all that. Wonder how the crowd's going to respond to Matthew Stafford, but this should be an interesting one. So keys to victory for both of these teams. For the Rams, they got to attack the Lions' weak secondary. I mean, they have all the weapons to do it. They have the quarterback to do it. But in order for the Rams to truly find a way to upset this Lions team, they got to attack that secondary. And, you know, Matthew Stafford's got to, you know, not make some self-inflicted mistakes that's going to cost his team. Same thing with the Lions. I mean, I feel like, you know, these two teams are kind of similar in one way. They have all these weapons. They have all these weapons on offense, yet sometimes, you know, they kill themselves with these self-inflicted wounds. You know, Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff with the boneheaded interceptions, some random fumble on the field by a running back or something. So either way, Jared Goff can certainly air it out too against a flawed Rams passing defense. So either way, both of these teams are going to be airing it out. It's going to be a shootout between two red hot offenses. So I do believe, you know, this game's going to come down to which defense is going to make that decisive play. The decisive play that's going to change the game for whichever team that makes it. And I do think, in my opinion, it's going to come from Detroit, whom, despite their troubles in the secondary, I mean, yes, they're getting C.J. Gardner-Johnson back if they haven't gotten him already, but I don't think that's going to be enough. But I do believe that their defense could do just enough to force Matthew Stafford to make that one mistake. That one mistake that's going to cost the Rams the game. So I'm picking the Lions to win this highly anticipated game of Wildcard Weekend over the Rams. Then we have the final game of Wildcard Weekend, and that is the NFC side wrapping it up, and that is the 5th-seeded Philadelphia Eagles going to Tampa Bay to take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in a rematch of week number 3 from their Monday night game. They're once again facing each other on a Monday night in a Monday night game where it really matters. So this is going to be, I don't know if I say it's an interesting one, but I'd say it's a tale of role reversal, I say. I guess you could say it's a tale, no, not role reversal, but momentum reversal. Yeah, we're going to fight for momentum, pal. But anyway, I digress. Both of these teams are riding with some kind of momentum. But certainly for the Eagles, it's the wrong kind of momentum because they were entering this season as the reigning, defending NFC champions. They came just short of a shootout in Super Bowl 57 against the Chiefs. So expectations were really sky high for them to make it back and get redemption in Vegas this coming season. So they started out well for them. They went 5-0 early in the season, and they earned a 10-1 mark. Excuse me. Oh, something in my nose. Anyway, they went 10-1 early by mid-November. Still performing at a high level. Jalen Hurts in that offense still performing with execution. But as the weeks progressed in their strong push, they were still you would notice that there were many subtle flaws. The passing defense that was very heralded, was getting torched regularly. So gone were the days of a defense led by CJ Gardner-Johnson, who's now in Detroit. They were getting torched regularly, leaving Jalen Hurts in the offense to either lead a comeback to get those wins, or make enough plays to hold off the opposition from finishing comebacks. So, yeah, there were times where the Eagles had a big lead, but then they nearly coughed it up. And then even during those wins, Jalen Hurts' turnover rate, it was slowly increasing. So Jalen Hurts last year didn't turn over the ball over much, but this year it was getting increased at a slow yet later rapid rate. And then once they got to December, it really started to snowball. Like you get into a Christmas fight, like you get into a snowball fight when you're playing in Lake Tahoe or whatever backyard you're in the East Coast. And boy, did it snowball very badly for the Philadelphia Eagles. Sure, they rallied against the Chiefs. Sure, they rallied against the Bills. But once they faced the buzzsaw, that was the San Francisco 49ers, in an NFC title rematch, and, visually looked like the game that could have happened much earlier in January of last year. Man, it looked like a team that, maybe it wasn't the one that we were expecting in that Super Bowl. But anyway, many would take that game as one bad loss, but then it got worse. It got worse for Jalen Hurts and the Eagles, because the next game, they got their butts whooped by the Dallas Cowboys on the road. And next thing you know, on the road against the Seahawks, they had a lead late in the game, and they coughed it up. And Jalen Hurts cost his team the game too by throwing 2 back-breaking interceptions, including the one to seal the win for the Seahawks. So not only were they losing these games, but their grip on the NFC East that they held on for so long, for much of the season, it was slipping away. And so was their grip on the top seed in the NFC slipping away. So for all these things that many of the Eagles fans were saying, they're going to get right, they're going to fix it, it didn't. 3 straight losses didn't fix it. And not even a supposedly easy schedule would serve as the fix for Philadelphia. That 3-game stretch that the NFL had for them, not even out and out. They barely beat a Giants team that really had nothing to play for. That was so beat up. They couldn't put them away at home. They nearly allowed them to come back and beat them. And then the next game, they choked. They choked a 21-6 lead to the 4-win Arizona Cardinals on New Year's Eve the next week. They blew that game. And then in the final week of the season, they blew that game. They no-showed a game in a game to have against the Giants in a rematch to finish the season 11-6. And now you're a wild card team. The Eagles are a wild card team. The reasons for that collapse: the offense got very one-dimensional with the rushing production of DeAndre Swift and Jalen Hurts dipping. It forced Jalen Hurts to throw more. And A.J. Brown wasn't catching the balls. Jalen Hurts was also getting pressured a lot more. The offensive line suddenly, that was a wall, was getting pressured a lot more. It was struggling to contain that pressure from opposing defenses. The pass rush was suddenly unable to create the same pressure it once did for most of the season. Once again, the troubling passing defense that had been struggling all season long. And then the injuries were coming in at a rapid rate. Safety Sidney Brown is gone for the season with a torn ACL. A.J. Brown left the game against the Giants with a knee injury. Jalen Hurts left the game with a finger injury in his throwing hand. So all these injuries are coming in at a very worst time for the Eagles going into the game on the road on Monday night against the NFC South champion, the Tampa Bay Bucks. Speaking of the Bucks, not many expectations I had for them going into the season, because they had the 7-time Super Bowl champion Tom Brady, who played for them for the last 3 years. He retired for good after faking retirement the year prior, but this time around, he retired for good. Other key players from the 3-year Brady run left in free agency because the Bucks had no money. But, the Bucks, by many, were expected to have a very down season. I expected them to finish last in the division if it wasn't Carolina. But then they brought in Baker Mayfield under center, and they actually started off quite nicely at 3-1. That one loss coming to the Philadelphia Eagles, that was due to Baker Mayfield's strong chemistry with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and you had an emerging running back in Rashad White. But then they returned from the early bye week, and then they tailspun, whatever the past tense verb was. But anyway, they lost their next 6 to 7 due to a weak passing defense, and they're stalling out on red zone drives. So it was like they couldn't score. They couldn't score in the red zone. They really pushed when it came to shove, and yet they couldn't score touchdowns. They settled for field goals. Like, what the hell? But then they started playing a little bit better, and along with some help from the falling Saints and the Falcons within the division, because the NFC South is trash, they won their final 5 of 6 games. And despite that one loss coming to the Saints, which kept the Saints alive in the NFC South, and Mayfield was also battling some rib issues, they still managed to clinch the division in the final week, beating Carolina on the road to render all that a moot point. So they finished the season 9-8, a 1-win improvement from last year at 8-9. And for the Bucks, with all their issues, they still have a good amount of positive things going for them compared to the Eagles. Because for the Eagles, like I said, all those piling injuries coming at them, including the Jalen Hurts. So he's going into that game less than 100%. We don't know how that finger injury is going to heal up, if it isn't healed up. So meanwhile, for the Baker Mayfield and the Bucks, yeah, they have some issues, like Baker Mayfield's sore ribs, and their red zone problems, their inability to score to continue drives when they're getting to scoring position. But for the Bucks, they still have some positive momentum. I mean, they bounced back from that loss to the Saints. They still won 5 of the last 6. So for all in all, for the Bucks, they got a decent role going into this game. So in terms of the keys to victory for both of these teams, for the Eagles, you got to force Baker Mayfield into turnovers. I mean, Baker Mayfield still has the tendency to give up the ball, to make a lot of mistakes. Hence, look at that game against the New Orleans Saints in that second meeting, and that Week 6 meeting against was it the Lions? But anyway, Baker Mayfield is still prone to turnovers if you get enough pressure on him. But the Eagles haven't found enough ways to create such pressure in the last couple weeks or so. But if you can force Baker Mayfield into plenty of turnovers, then the Eagles will find a way to get this win. And then for the Bucks, if the offensive line can protect you, if Baker Mayfield can find ways to do it, attack the very weak passing defense of the Eagles. Like, they are that bad right now that even I think Baker Mayfield can find a way to dissect it. He almost did in Week 3, but I guess the lights got too bright for him. But now that he's got a little bit more, as the season wore along, I feel like if he watches the film from that game and watches a little bit more film from this one, takes those things into account, I think he can find a way to probably try to dissect that better this time. So yeah, the Bucks are a pretty flawed team, but at least, like I said, they're going to this game with enough positive momentum to pull off what kind of feels like an upset, but at the same time, it doesn't, because the Eagles, they have been struggling on both sides of the ball for what feels like almost a month now, especially on offense. And the injuries are pouring at the worst possible time. Even if it's minor injuries, they're not going into this game 100%. Like I said, even if it's minor. So I'm expecting the Bucks to clean up what went wrong from the Week 3 meeting and avenge this loss to the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that was primed to be the number 1 seed, potentially be the number 1 seed in the conference. But now they just completely fell apart. They are falling apart at the worst possible time. They look defeated. And yeah, sure. People are saying, oh, we're doubting them, but just look at them. They don't feel like themselves right now. And for the Bucks, I feel like they're going to pick on them. They're going to pick on them and get some payback in this game to close out Super Wildcard Weekend. So there you go. Those are my picks. That is your Filthy Casual preview, your Filthy Casual guide to Super Wildcard Weekend 2023. All, 6 games? All 6 games, if I have that correctly, covered in this big, fat, Filthy Casual podcast. And let me know your picks. Let me know who you're going with. What game are you most excited for on the opener to the NFL playoffs 2023? And yeah, man, let the Christmas for NFL fans begin for this month. And then once we get into February, we'll cry. We'll cry that it's all over. We'll drown our sorrows. That is the off season. But for now, we will enjoy this. We will revel in this. We will consume this like there's no tomorrow. Damn it. We will enjoy this like this is our WrestleMania, road to WrestleMania. But it's much better than that. But anyway, that is it for this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I am your host, DylanLasagna. Thank you for tuning in into this episode number 172 of this icy yet spicy podcast, talking about the Filthy Casuals guide to your NFL Super Wildcard Weekend 2023. And as always, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of sports. Whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening on audio, thank you for the support. And until the next episode or the next video on YouTube, peace out.